The TV series Then Came Bronson, about a man who traveled the USA on a motorcycle, first aired on March 24, 1969, and lasted one season, ending on April 1, 1970. My good friend from high school, John Transu, can't remember if that show influenced his decision to want to make a cross-country motorcycle trip, but coincidentally, it was about that time he approached me and another friend, Pat Cartier, about riding our motorcycles up through Canada and then down to New York City and back. John had a Triumph Bonneville 650, I had a Honda 450 Scrambler, and Pat had a BSA. Sadly, Pat didn't think his bike would last the trip, so he declined. But on June 1st, 1970, John and I set off on a 9-day, 2,500-mile journey that I've documented in this video. To start, the only plan John made was arrangements to get us across Lake Michigan on the ferry. After that, we just glanced at a map as we went, picking two-lane highways as often as possible. We rode the SS Spartan, a car ferry that ran from Milwaukee to Ludington, Michigan. Throughout this video, I've weaved together photos John and I took on our trip 50 years ago, along with images courtesy of Google Street and the internet, that show how the places we visited look pretty much today. You'll notice some drastic changes between then and now. If you're interested in more information, please check the internet links I provided in the description below this video. Back when we took the car ferry, there were very few people on board and it was pretty boring. Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, who owned the ferry in 1970, was about to go broke. Of the 3 ferries they ran, only the SS Badger runs today. It is popular and more resembles a cruise ship. The SS Spartan that we rode on is no longer in service. It's docked in Ludington, Michigan, and it is used for spare parts for the SS Badger. Lake Michigan was fogged in the entire 4.5-hour voyage. It turned out to be a wet trip. It rained during some of the day on 8 of the 9 days we were on the road. John the Sublime. Donovan the Ridiculous. Here we are docking in the mist at Ludington, Michigan. Although the trip was smooth, they had us lash our motorcycles to these support posts. Bikers still make the voyage, as this dude is doing in 2014. A third C&O ferry, the Père Marquette 22, seen in this photo, no longer exists. This long line of passengers shows how popular the ferry is today. With the day half gone, I think we made it as far as Flint, Michigan. We gassed up and waited out the rain at this station somewhere in Michigan. Due to the rain, we couldn't camp, so we found a cheap motel. Here's John putting on his shoes while holding onto the garbage bags he wore over them the day before to keep them dry in the rain. Cleaning his face shield. John was suffering an allergy, so here he sneezes into the face shield he just cleaned. I have no idea why I took this photo, but its location helped me recreate the route of our trip. At Port Huron, Michigan, we crossed over the Blue Water Bridge into Canada. 50 years ago, this was a single 2-lane bridge. When we got to the top of the bridge, John stopped and we faked that we were looking at the view. He told me he'd forgotten that he had an ounce of weed in his shaving kit, and fearing Canadian customs, contemplated throwing it in the river. He decided to take the risk. Canadian customs was nothing like it is today. Back then, it was a small building with only a few customs officers. One checked me and another checked John. The officer checking through John's belongings picked up his shaving kit and asked him what it was. John told him, "My shaving kit," and luckily he put it back in his bag without opening it. No dog sniffers back then. Seeing how comprehensive the customs inspection is now, I don't think we'd have made it through today. With customs behind us, we entered Ontario on the open road.
Going down that long, lonesome highway. Gonna live life my way. Yes, I'm going down that long, lonesome highway. Gonna live life my way.
We made it 68 miles when John's Triumph started having a problem. We stopped at Rocky Cycle Center in London for repairs. Heading out of London, it was quicker to take the smaller Ontario Highway number 2 than to go back out to 401, so we ended up traveling from London to Paris and going through Woodstock. The way I discovered we'd taken this route was because of this photo of a railroad bridge. I searched all over Google Maps, Street, and Google Earth, but I thought the bridge was near Hamilton, another 29 miles up the road. While searching through the photos of railroad bridges, I came upon a railroad website run by Charles Cooper. I emailed Charles and asked him if he could identify the bridge. He knew immediately, and that is how I discovered we took Highway 2 to Paris. Ah, the wonders of the internet. Charles has an excellent railroad website. I put the link in the description below this video. I was unable to exactly match the vista where I took the bridge photo because today the view is blocked by trees. Our next stop was Hamilton, Ontario. Here are some comparison photos from 1970 to today. Why we doubled back on York Boulevard to see the Dundurn Castle, I can only guess that we saw signs on the highway and decided to take a look. Internet websites show Dundurn Castle to be very active, beautiful inside, and have tours. But when we were there, nothing was going on. All we were able to do was walk around outside. It is apparently an ongoing project and has had many improvements and additions in the past 50 years. It was my turn to perform some motorcycle maintenance. In the background, this area of Dundurn Castle no longer exists and has been completely rebuilt. The red car confirmed we were still at the castle. With threatening skies, John dressed for rain. We protected our belongings with garbage bags. Our next stop was Toronto, another 38 miles ahead. I believe this next series of 4 photos were taken somewhere around Toronto. At first, I assumed we got gas at the Esso station and then drove up onto this berm to see the view of Lake Ontario. It's such a lousy view, I can't imagine why I took the pictures. The closest I could come to matching the location is the Prince of Wales Park on Lakeshore Drive in Toronto. But if this is the place, it isn't near the Esso gas station. I believe the old dark building on the left is the YMCA where we spent the night when in Toronto. We found out about it from talking to draft dodgers when in Yorkville, the main area in Toronto where they hung out. The YMCA charged 25 cents to spend the night and another 25 cents for breakfast. We were given a tiny cake of soap, a washcloth, and a towel, and we slept on Army-style bunk beds. There may have been 100 or more beds, and all were taken. I was a bit amused when I overheard an Army deserter telling about 10 draft dodgers what it was like in the Army. They tell you when to go to bed, when to get up, the food is lousy. Yet here we are on Army bunk beds. It was lights out at 10 o'clock, and they got us up at 6 a.m. And then the 25-cent breakfast was terrible. Guys were sneaking around during the night, and sleep didn't come easy. Our next stop was Yorkville. This was Yorkville in 1970. This is Yorkville today, a drastic change. The next day, June 3rd, we headed to Montreal. We apparently went north on Yonge Street to catch Highway 401, and I snapped this photo of the phantom pantyhose lady on the billboard at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton Avenue. Toronto has gone through massive changes in the last 50 years, as this September 2019 Google Street photo shows of that same corner. We drove along Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, and 223 miles from Toronto, we came upon Fort Wellington National Historical Site. We needed a break, so we checked out the fort. John decided to see if he could breach the rampart. Like in the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom shows, where Marlon Perkins stayed back watching while Jim Fowler roped the grizzly bear, I stayed back with the camera while John risked becoming childless. Success was achieved, however, no muskets were firing at him. Fort Wellington is quite interesting. There is a link in the description below if you want to know more. Only 1.5 miles up the road, we passed the Windmill Pont Lighthouse. It didn't look like rain, so we decided to camp at a campground before getting to Montreal. I don't know if the Riverside Cedar Campground is actually where we stayed, but after looking at all the campgrounds on Google Street, it looked the closest to being similar to my photos from 1970. The next morning, we had only driven a short distance when we passed the Altsville CPR train station and steam train. Charles Cooper also helped me with information and some photos of the station and train. I noticed right away that the station had been re-roofed because the roof line had been changed from having some doghouse gables to a hip roof. When we arrived in downtown Montreal, by coincidence, the first major thing we saw was the historic CPR Windsor train station. I discovered that it's been going through major renovations over the past few years. Not far from Windsor Station was the Hotel Fairmont Queen Elizabeth Hotel. John and I can't remember us staying there, but I don't know why else I took the photo. In this photo, the domed building can be seen. Since we'd only traveled a short distance from the campground, we had most of the day to explore Montreal. Naturally, we headed for the Expo 67 grounds. This is the biosphere as we saw it on June 4th, 1970. Here is a photo of the biosphere during the Expo 67. I don't know what they did to the biosphere to make it transparent, but here's how it looked in 2013. It doesn't look like there are 62 flagpoles, but 62 countries participated in the Expo 67. John looks at the defunct Expo 67 grounds. Although Wikipedia says most of the pavilions continued on as exhibition called Man and His World, opened during the summer months from 1968 to 1984, nothing was open when we were there in 1970. All quiet and an empty swimming pool. We left the Expo 67 grounds and crossed the St. Lawrence River on the huge Jacques Cartier Bridge. We stopped briefly so I could take a couple more photos of the Expo grounds on the north side of the island. This is what that same view looks like today. I took this photo from the same location, but just moved the view a little to the right. You can see I'm on a bridge with my motorcycle because the motorcycle mirror can be seen in the lower right-hand corner. Since I kept no notes of our trip, some locations were difficult to determine. This was one of them. I never would have found this location if it hadn't been for coming across a video on YouTube by Retro Quebec, made from a movie taken during the construction and opening of Expo 67. I saw the circular buildings circled in red that were in my photo, and then went back to Google Street to find the bridge. Here were the two towers of the Pont Jacques Cartier Bridge. The red circle is the location where I took the photos. We apparently came up the ramp out of the Expo 67 grounds, and I stopped before merging into traffic and took the two photos. The next morning, John and I drove along the St. Lawrence River on the Boulevard La Salle, heading for another bridge, the Honor Mercier Bridge. It was now June 5th, and I shot this photo of the St. Lawrence River. Here is the same view from Google Street, taken August 2019. At this point, the Honor Mercier Bridge was coming into view. These are massive bridges since the St. Lawrence River is a seaway for ocean-going vessels. And here is a Google Street view from the same location but taken 49 years later in August of 2019. Once we crossed the bridge, we headed for the Canada-USA border. We stayed off the interstate and stuck to the two-lane highway of Ontario 221. The USA's border control point was this small building, similar to what we went through when we entered Canada 3 days before. Notice the wet pavement. More rain. Here is that same building today. It's obviously gone through a significant renovation and is much more controlled. Welcome to New York. I couldn't match this location with a Google Street image. Apparently, Customs and Border Control didn't allow Google to drive through with their camera turned on. Looking back to the way we came, here is how the Canadian entry checkpoint looked like in 1970. It had also gone through extensive changes. Here you can see how far we were off the beaten path of the interstate. Our next stop was at the Capital District Historical New York marker. We'll find out why after a couple more photos. Rain and more rain. John had used up his extra garbage bags and bread wrappers that he'd been using to keep his feet dry, so he decided to modify his riding style. Taking a more relaxed approach, John's sidekick followed his lead. I don't think I'd be smiling if driving in the rain today. The two-lane highway we were on crisscrossed I-87, and we decided we needed to make up some time, so we took it. But we didn't get far before we had to stop at this rest area. We parked at the red circle, in front of the Capital District New York Historical marker, so John could make repairs. I think this is where he had to put his rear foot peg back on. I recall we were going down the road and it fell off. Triumph motorcycles are known for their vibration, and John's Triumph seemed to be continually vibrating apart. Even this rest area has gone through changes. The pavement has been reduced and the wood log barrier has been removed. A quick look back at the way we came. Closer to New York, we went through mountains. Here we came to an open area that looked down on the Hudson River. A better image of the same view, September 2019, from Google Street. That same view from Google Street, September 2019. Moving more to the right was this steep drop-off and a somewhat dangerous sharp curve. That sharp curve and drop-off have been re-engineered. As you can see in the background of this photo, we hadn't left the mountains yet. Also notice the Sunoco sign in the ravine on the other side of the guardrail. John's chain came off and he put it back on at the Sunoco station. We crossed a bridge and got as far as the Gulf station and his chain came off again. John was so disgusted with the problems he'd been having with his Triumph, he went into such a cussing rant about how he was going to throw his motorcycle into the Hudson River that I started laughing. He was so animated and funny that I laughed to the point I couldn't hold up my scrambler, so it tipped over, pinning my ankle against a curb. I was suffering intense pain, but still laughing and too weak to lift my bike off my leg. John had to come and pull my motorcycle off of me. My ankle injury proved to be a problem later in New York City. Since we had no plan and just made decisions as we went, I don't know how we ended up staying at the historic Albert Hotel in Greenwich Village. I think John wanted to see Greenwich Village, and somehow we just ended up at the Albert. We couldn't have picked a better location, about halfway between the Empire State Building and the ferry to Staten Island and the Statue of Liberty. Here's a photo I took out of our hotel room window. Notice the Albert Hotel entry canopy and the street sellers beyond. Greenwich Village was home to a lot of artists who sold their creations on the sidewalks. We were told that if we left our motorcycles parked on the street, they'd be stolen before morning. But the Albert Hotel didn't have a car park, and John was at the point he hoped someone would steal his Triumph anyway. Here's the spot where our motorcycles had been parked 49 years before this Google Street image was taken. This is the entrance to the Albert Hotel today. It's now part of a 4-building complex that covers the entire block. In 1954, Alfred Hitchcock released one of his famous thriller movies called Rear Window with Jimmy Stewart and Raymond Burr. In that movie, there is a famous line, "Meet me at the bar at the Albert Hotel." I had no idea until I did this research for this video that we'd spent the night in such a notable hotel. As we checked into the hotel, it was evening, so we decided it would be great to see New York City from atop the Empire State Building at night. I don't know what information we used to make our ridiculous decision, but we decided to walk. The Albert Hotel is located on 10th Street and the Empire State Building on 33rd Street, 2 miles away. That wouldn't have been a big deal if it hadn't been for my painful ankle. We'd walked a mile to 22nd Street before we even had a glimpse of our destination, but it didn't look that far away. We passed 23rd Street, and then when Broadway merged into 5th Avenue, the Empire State Building was right there, not looking very far away. At 26th Street, it didn't look like we were much closer, and my ankle was getting quite painful. John asked if I wanted to take a taxi the rest of the way, and I said, nah, it doesn't look very much further. The problem is, no matter how much we walked, it still looked right there. When we got to 30th Street, it finally looked like we were making some progress, but those last 3 blocks just about did me in. Funny that I didn't take my camera. The Empire State Building is supposed to be the most photographed building in the world. I assume I didn't bring along my camera because it was getting dark and I didn't think I'd be able to take any photos. Since I didn't get any pictures, I'll lean on Google Street for a few images to give you an idea of what we saw. Construction of the Twin Towers World Trade Center started coming out of the ground in August of 1968, so they must have been in the skyline, but I don't remember seeing them. This view looks north at Upper New York City. This evening Google image is probably close to what we would have seen. The Albert Hotel is out there somewhere. When it came to getting back to the hotel, I wisely chose to take a cab. The next day we spent some of the morning in Greenwich Village. We then drove our motorcycles to Battery Park, where we could board the ferry to Staten Island and the Statue of Liberty. When we parked our bikes, we left our belongings tied to them. We were told they'd be gone when we got back. John said they can have my motorcycle too. But nobody took our stuff. Perhaps the thief would have assumed that anything left there wouldn't be worth much, and they'd have been right. While waiting for our ferry, we spent some time at the World War II War Memorial. The view in 2016. The view in 1970. We passed by Ellis Island on the way. The ferry swings all the way around the front of the Statue of Liberty and docks around back on the far side, so visitors get a magnificent panoramic view. The last few steps up inside the great lady's head. Do you recognize who the movie stars are? Me neither. Looking around the great lady's raised right arm. Here I am looking out the grill work in the Statue of Liberty's crown. A promenade runs along the ocean below. Just being silly or coincidental timing when John stuck his hand into the picture. I'm quite proud of this photo. It would have been nice if the Goodyear blimp was behind the Statue of Liberty so this combination photo didn't get her backside. But obviously the blimp would go in front of the statue so passengers could see her face. Done with New York City, we now had to get back to Milwaukee, 922 miles away. With no notes from our trip, I'm not sure where we stayed every night, so I'll wing it from here. It was raining again, and it looks like it was my turn to have a motorcycle problem. Judging from my smile, John was teasing me since overall my Honda had held up pretty well. As we traveled through Pennsylvania, we saw these transmission lines cutting across a mountain to our right. Considering the problems John had experienced with his bike, I don't know what possessed him to want to go up the side of the mountain on the maintenance road, but off he went with me in tow. Like the Empire State Building, it didn't look very far away until we drove to get there. Once we were at the foot of the mountain, we could see how steep the maintenance road was, and John knew his cycle wouldn't make it. But he gave me one of those, if I had your bike, I'd do it. With the challenge made, I dropped off my bags and headed out for the mountain. If you notice, the maintenance road rises at practically 45 degrees, 30 degrees at least, and that's just the first of two sections. The initial straightforward section of the road that you can see over my right shoulder was challenging enough. The name Scrambler was a style statement. A 450 Honda Scrambler weighs 185 kilos, so it isn't a serious off-road bike, let alone built for hill climbing. I made it up the mountain to about the White Circle. After climbing the forward section and making the left turn, I'd only gone a short distance when the road turned into fist-sized rocks. There was no way the bike could make it through that gauntlet of rubble. The road was also a bit washed out and practically dropped off the left side. I hit the brakes and my bike started falling to the left. I couldn't hold it and laid it down, breaking my clutch lever. With some difficulty, I got my bike back up and nursed it down the mountainside. In this photo, that first straight climb is more evident. I don't know why I'm raising my fist. I certainly didn't conquer the mountain. I'm just happy I'm in one piece, I guess. To get back to the road, I had to rob my front brake lever to replace my clutch lever. When we found the next Honda shop, I bought a new brake lever and I was good to go. This next little story I must first qualify by saying this photo is not of the town where the incident took place. The town I was looking for had a central courthouse square, but after quite a search I couldn't find it, so for illustration purposes only I'm using this photo. I carried cash, but John brought along traveler's checks, so he had to periodically stop at a bank and exchange a few for cash. We were going through a little town, and across from the courthouse there was a bank. We parked our bikes a little way down the street where it was legal. It was a beautiful sunny day, so while John walked to the bank, I sat down on the curb and laid back with my eyes closed, my head in my hands soaking up the sun. There was nobody around, but suddenly a boot slammed into my ribs and almost took my breath away. I looked up and there stood a big old sheriff. He said, "What are you doing in my town, boy?" I told him my partner was cashing traveler's checks at the bank, and he said, "When he gets back, you best be gone. I don't want to see you again, you hear? Now get off my sidewalk." When John came back, I was sitting on my bike, somewhat doubled over and still in pain. He asked me what was wrong, and when I told him, he was livid and wanted to go find that sheriff and kick his ass. I had visions of the movie Easy Rider going through my head and said, "John, we don't know this town, and we wouldn't get far. Let's just get out of here." We wisely got the heck out of there. As I said, the weather was good, so somewhere in western Pennsylvania, we went down a farm road and camped in the grass. John was suffering from his allergies again. Maybe up in Canada they have different weeds. I try to find humor wherever I can and caught John making a full-body sneeze. You can almost see the wind ripping through the plants behind him. I'm certain this was John sneezing again right before we left. I don't remember if John's engine stopped or if he stopped here to fix something else, but he was having trouble getting it started again. John told me that one time I had to pull him with my Honda to get his bike started. Maybe this was that time. You can see by the flight of his hair that he has just completed the downstroke. When traveling through Ohio, we stopped for gas, and sitting by the station was a Mercury Cougar with two attractive young ladies and an older woman who was driving. The young ladies got out and approached us. One picked John, the other me. They made sure John and I were separated far enough we couldn't talk to each other, and the gal who picked me started telling me she was working her way through school by selling magazine subscriptions. She put on the hard sell, and every little bit she would take my hand and shake it, saying, "Give me a shake for good luck." That personal touch and her pretty smile were a bit disarming. But I've never liked being suckered, so I didn't buy her magazines. She finally got angry, gave up, and stomped off to the Cougar. John's girl headed for the car also, and I asked John if he bought any magazines. He laughed and said, "Hell no." The driver of the Cougar must have been their boss and was upset with no sale because she squealed the tires in anger as they bolted out of the station. The rest of the way home was uneventful, but I will forever be thankful that John asked me to go on this memorable trip. Thank you for watching.